Ivan Petrovich Spektrov's face grew pale, and his voice quavered as he turned down the lamp and began his story. It was Christmas Eve, 1883. The earth lay shrouded in impenetrable darkness. I was returning home from the house of a friend who has since died, where we had all been sitting up late attending a séance. For some reason, the streets through which I was passing were unlit, and I had almost to grope my way along. I was living in Moscow, near the church of St. Mary and the Tombstones, in a house belonging to the civil servant Kadavrov. In other words, in one of the remotest parts of the Arbat district. My thoughts as I walked along were gloomy and depressing. "The end of your life is at hand. Repent." Such had been the words addressed to me at the séance by Spinoza, whose spirit we had succeeded in calling up. I asked for confirmation, and the sorcerer not only repeated the words, but added, "This very night." I'm not a believer in spiritualism, but the thought of death, or even the merest allusion to it, is enough to plunge me into despondency. Death is inevitable, my friends. It is commonplace. But nevertheless the thought of death is repugnant to human nature. Now, as cold, unfathomable darkness hemmed me in, and raindrops whirled madly before my eyes, as the wind groaned plaintively above my head, and I could neither see a single living soul nor hear a single human sound around me, my heart filled with a vague, inexplicable dread. I, a man free from all superstition, hurried through the streets, afraid to look around or glance to either side. I felt sure that if I did look around, I would see an apparition of death close behind me. This feeling of dread, which despite its vagueness you will all recognize, did not leave me even when I climbed to the 3rd floor of Kadavrov's house, unlocked the door, and entered my room. It was dark in my humble abode. The wind was moaning in the stove and tapping on the damper, almost as though it were begging to be let into the warm. If Spinoza was telling the truth, I reflected with a smile, then I am to die this night, to the accompaniment of these moans. What a gruesome thought! I lit a match. A violent gust of wind raced across the roof. The quiet moaning turned to a ferocious roar. Somewhere down below, a half-loose shutter started banging, and the damper began whining plaintively for help. The moment was to prove inopportune, however, for reflections of that kind. When the sulphur of my match flared up with a blue flame and I looked round the room, an unexpected, a terrifying spectacle met my eyes. Oh, why didn't that gust of wind blow out my match? Then perhaps I should have seen nothing and my hair would not have stood on end. I gave a wild cry, took a step backwards towards the door, and filled with terror, amazement, and despair, closed my eyes. In the centre of the room stood a coffin. The blue flame did not last long, but I had time to make out the coffin's main features. I saw its richly shimmering pink brocade. I saw the gold-embroidered cross on its lid. There are certain things, my friends, which imprint themselves on one's memory, even when one has glimpsed them but for a single moment. So it was with that coffin. I saw it but for a second, yet I recall it in the most minute detail. It was a coffin made for a person of medium height, and judging by the pink colour, for a young girl. The expensive silk brocade, the feet, the bronze handles, all these suggested that the deceased came from a wealthy family. I rushed headlong from my room, not stopping to think or consider, but experiencing only unutterable fear, and flew downstairs. The staircase and corridors were in darkness. I kept tripping over my coat-tails, and how I avoided tumbling head over heels down the stairs and breaking my neck I shall never know. Finding myself in the street, I leant up against a wet lamp-post and tried to recover my composure. My heart was thumping horribly, and I had a tight feeling across the chest. I would not have been so taken aback if I had discovered in my room a fire, a thief, or a mad dog. I would not have been so taken aback if the ceiling had come down, the floor had collapsed, or the walls had caved in. All that is natural and comprehensible. But how could a coffin have turned up in my room? Where had it come from? How had an expensive coffin, evidently made for a young girl of noble birth, found its way into the miserable room of a minor civil servant? Was the coffin empty, or was it occupied? And who was she, this rich young aristocrat who had quitted life so prematurely and paid me this dread, disturbing visit? It was a tantalizing mystery. If it's not a case of the supernatural, the thought flashed through my mind, then there's foul play involved. I became lost in conjecture. My door had been locked while I was out, and only my very close friends knew where I kept the key. But the coffin certainly hadn't been left by friends. Then it was also conceivable that the undertakers might have delivered the coffin to me in error. They might have muddled up the names, mistaken the floor number or the door, and then taken the coffin to the wrong place. But who ever heard of Moscow undertakers leaving a room without being paid, or at least waiting for a tip? The spirits foretold my death, I thought. Perhaps they've already set about providing me with a coffin, too. I'm not a believer in spiritualism, my friends, nor was I then. But such a coincidence is enough to plunge even a philosopher into a mood of mysticism. But all this is absurd, I decided, and I'm being as cowardly as a schoolboy. It was an optical illusion, no more than that. On my way home, I was in such a gloomy state of mind that it's hardly surprising my overwrought nerves thought they saw a coffin. Of course, an optical illusion. What else could it be? The rain was lashing my face, and the wind kept tugging angrily at my hat and coat-tails. I was wet through and chilled to the bone. I would have to find shelter, but where? To go back home would mean running the risk of seeing the coffin again, and that was a spectacle beyond my powers of endurance. Not seeing a single living soul, or hearing a single human sound around me, left alone in the company of a coffin, which perhaps contained a dead body, I might easily lose my reason. But to remain on the street in the cold and pouring rain was equally impossible. I decided to go and spend the night with my friend Lugubrovich, who, as you know, was later to shoot himself. He lived in a block of furnished rooms belonging to the merchant Skeletov, the ones on the corner of Dead Man's Passage. I did not find my friend at home. After knocking on his door and deciding he must be out, I felt for his key on the lintel, unlocked the door and went in. I flung my wet coat on the floor and, feeling my way to the sofa, sat down to recuperate. It was very dark. The wind droned mournfully in the ventilator. Behind the stove a cricket chirped over and over again its monotonous song. The Kremlin bells had begun to ring for Christmas morning communion. Hastily I struck a match. But its light did not dispel my gloomy mood. On the contrary, a dreadful, unutterable terror seized me again. I cried out, staggered backwards, and rushed blindly from the apartment. In my friend's room I had seen the same as in my own. A coffin. My friend's coffin was almost twice as large as mine, and its sub-fusk upholstery gave it a peculiarly gloomy appearance. How had it got there? That it was an optical illusion now seemed quite certain. There couldn't be a coffin in every room. I was obviously suffering from a nervous disorder, from hallucinations. Wherever I now went, I would see before me the dreadful dwelling place of death. In other words, I was going mad. I was suffering from a kind of coffinomania, and the cause of my derangement was not hard to find. I had only to recall the spiritualist séance and the words of Spinoza. I'm going mad, I thought to myself with terror clutching my head. Oh, my God, what am I to do? My head was splitting and my knees shaking. The rain was pouring down in buckets. The wind was piercing right through me, and I had neither coat nor hat. To go back to the apartment for them was impossible, beyond my powers of endurance. Fear gripped me firmly in her cold embrace. My hair was standing on end, and cold perspiration streamed down my face, even though I believed that the coffin was an hallucination. What was I to do? I was going mad, and in danger of catching a violent cold. Fortunately, I remembered that not far from Dead Man's Passage lived my good friend Krypton, a recently qualified doctor, who had also been at the séance with me that night. I hurried round to his place. This was before he married his merchant heiress, and he was still living on the 4th floor of a house belonging to the State Councillor Nekropolsky. At Krypton's, my nerves were fated to undergo yet another ordeal. As I was climbing to the 4th floor, I heard above me a terrible din of running footsteps and slamming doors. "Help!" I heard a soul-piercing cry. "Help! Porter!" And a moment later a dark figure in coat and battered top hat came hurtling down the stairs towards me. "Krypton!" I exclaimed, recognizing my friend. "Is that you, Krypton? Whatever's wrong?" Krypton pulled up short and clutched my hand convulsively. He was pale, breathing heavily and trembling. His eyes were rolling wildly, and his chest was heaving. "Is that you, Spectrov?" he asked in a sepulchral voice. "Is that really you? You're as white as a ghost. Are you quite sure you're not an hallucination? Oh, my God, you scare me stiff." "But what about you? You look ghastly," I replied. "Oh, let me get my breath back, old chap. It's wonderful to see you. If it really is you and not an optical illusion. That damned séance. Would you believe it? My nerves were so overwrought that when I got back to my room just now, I thought I saw a coffin." I could not believe my ears and asked for confirmation. "A coffin? A coffin? A real coffin," said the doctor, sitting down exhausted on one of the stairs. "I'm no coward, but the devil himself would get a fright if he came home after a séance and bumped into a coffin in the dark." Stumbling and stammering, I told the doctor about the coffins I had seen. For a moment we gazed at each other, our eyes popping and our mouths gaping in astonishment. Then, to make sure we were not seeing hallucinations, we began pinching each other. "Oh, yes, we both feel pain," said the doctor, "which means that we're not asleep and seeing each other in a dream, and that means the coffins, mine and yours too, are not optical illusions, but really do exist. So what's your next move, old man?" After standing for a solid hour on the cold staircase and losing ourselves in conjecture and surmise, we were chilled to the bone and made up our minds to cast aside cowardly fear and wake up the floor porter in order to return with him to the doctor's room. This we did. On entering the apartment, we lit a candle, and there, indeed, we saw a coffin, covered in white silk brocade with a gold fringe and tassels. The porter crossed himself reverently. "Now we can find out," said the doctor, pale-faced and trembling all over, "whether this coffin is empty or inhabited." After an understandably long period of indecision, the doctor bent over and, gritting his teeth in dread and anticipation, wrenched off the lid of the coffin. We looked inside, and the coffin was empty. There was no dead body. But we did find a letter, which read, "My dear Krypton, as you know, my father-in-law's business has been going from bad to worse. He's up to his neck in debt. Tomorrow, or the day after, they're coming to make an inventory of all his stock, which will deal the death blow to his family and mine, and to our honour, which is dearer to me than anything. At our family conference yesterday, we decided to hide everything precious and valuable. As my father-in-law's stock consists entirely of coffins — he is, as you know, a master coffin-maker, the best in town — we decided to hide away all the best coffins. I appeal to you as a friend to help me save our fortune and our honour. In the hope that you will assist us in preserving our stock, I am sending you one coffin, old chap, with the request that you keep it until it is required. Without the help of our friends and acquaintances, we shall certainly perish. I hope this is not too much to ask, especially as the coffin will not be with you for more than a week. I have sent a coffin to all those I consider our true friends, and am relying on their nobility and generosity. Affectionately yours, Ivan, next of kin." For 3 months afterwards, I was under a specialist in nervous disorders, whilst our friend the coffin-maker's son-in-law not only saved his honour and his stock, but set up a funeral parlour and deals in memorials and tombstones. His business is none too healthy, and now, When I come home each evening, I'm always afraid I'm going to see a white marble memorial or a catafalque by my bedside.